Oh, happy Monday, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. And thank you for spending your Valentine's Day with us here on this webinar. And thanks again for your time. I know some of you were on our webinar last week. My name is Michelle Rosado, and I work at the Connecticut Department of Education, working on the Connecticut SAT School Day. And I'm joined with my wonderful colleagues, and we have a combination of College Board staff and CSDE staff. So I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Deirdre.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Happy Monday afternoon. I hope you're doing well. And my name's Deirdre. I work with Michelle and Abe, as well as our very talented and supportive College Board team on the Connecticut SAT School Day. And I'm here to support your work as you work with your students that use accommodations and supports on the SAT. Nice to be with you. Abe?
Hi, Abe Chris, Performance Office at CSDE. Thank you for taking the time to come out this afternoon, and thanks also to my colleagues at CSDE, Michelle and Dee, and then our partners at College Board. And I'll turn it over to, I guess, Adrian. Adrian?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Adrienne Tupper. I work at the College Board on in our state contracts program management team. So I have the privilege of working and supporting the Connecticut administrations. And I am here with two of my College Board colleagues. I'm going to toss it over to Keisha first.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keisha Smith. I am the Senior Director of SSD Customer Service. I work with our state team in addition to CSDE to support accommodations and supports for students testing for the upcoming Connecticut SAT School Day.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. My name is Aixa Julius. I am part of the digital operations team here in College Board, and I work directly with Adrian and Keisha, and of course the Connecticut team. And I am here to support and assist with any and all questions related to our digital administration.
Great, thanks. I think I have a few upfront slides. I'm not going to spend too much time because the bulk of the presentation is going to be covered by Keisha on how you manage the test settings for students with approved accommodations. So if we go to the next slide, I think this is just some housekeeping. If you have questions, you can enter them into the question box in the platform. Keisha, there should be, you can either use your arrows to move the slides, or if you hover the mouse down on the left-hand side, you should see some arrows kind of appear there.
Okay, there we go.
And there's little Stella. Thank you for attending again. And also this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to the Connecticut SAT School Day webpage. The webinar from last week on Thursday has been posted. It should be visible very soon, so on that website. Okay. And here's our contact information. Deirdre and I, please feel free to email us. If you have questions, we can also set up to do a Teams meeting with you where we can share information if you're having trouble with TIDE or you're having trouble accessing the training that we talked about last week. You can feel free to reach out. We can set something up with you, or we can just help you troubleshoot, okay? And there's our test dates. And just a reminder, you can choose any of the test dates you wish to use to test your students. Unlike previous years, schools do not need to report to us which test date they have chosen. We strongly encourage you to do your makeup testing in March, and you don't need to wait until April. And I think that's all on this one. We have a lot of resources. Sometimes I think I'm overwhelming everybody when I send out my emails, but there are a lot of resources to support you. There's a calendar with some of the events, some of the things happening this week. You should be receiving a shipment of the only shipment you're going to receive that has your manuals in it, your student guides, and other materials that you need to support the digital test administration. You'll also have access to the non-standard administration report on Wednesday. in SSD online. Okay, and we have a newsletter that we put out probably every couple of weeks or so. You should automatically be getting those newsletters when they come out. If you're not, you can reach out to me. We can add you to the listserv. And of course, our website and the digital website for the College Board. Definitely want to bookmark that one. And just participation, the expectation is that you're going to test all your grade 11 students, and we're looking for 95% participation rate this year. Okay, so registration and TIDE, a lot of you ask questions about particular students. Once you get access to TIDE, I know a lot of you have checked out your rosters and you've asked me about particular students who are maybe moving to a different grade because they have credits have changed, or you've gotten a new student. You can't add students into TIDE. I know with some other College Board programs, districts can add students into TIDE, but for our program, you cannot. You have to make any updates in PSIS, so work with that PSIS coordinator at your district level to make changes on any students who are showing up on what you believe is inaccurate information for that particular student, whether it be grade or what have you. You have to correct it through PSIS. We submit several files to the College Board. We have that chart right on there. We're going to be sending another file, I believe it's Friday. We've sent 2 other files. So as you make changes and we send a new file, that information becomes updated in TIDE. And this is just some more information about TIDE and PSIS.
Okay.
And this
Thank
is
you,
you.
Michelle.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Keisha.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon again, everyone. So today we will be going over important reminders about digital testing and accommodations. I know many of you may have questions. Feel free to put those into the chat. You will probably learn that throughout today's presentation, we have a lot of information to go over. So a lot of your questions may already be addressed in today's deck. However, feel free to add your questions to the chat, and someone from our team will be responding to your questions. So in terms of student practice, we know that that has come up as a big concern. Students who test with accommodations can use the digital test preview to see, in order to get an idea of what their testing experience will be like. Here we've just shown you a quick example of how the screen will look when you log on to the digital test preview. So it is important that test coordinators participate in training. The digital test coordinator feature is on-demand training module, and it does include a section that is specific to testing students with accommodations. Test coordinators can share this training with SSD coordinators who may also be participating in terms of assisting with test day for students. There is a very important feature, as you see here. There will be a checklist, one in terms of the sections, using TIDE to modify test sections for students with accommodations, confirming that all accommodations listed are on the non-standard administration report, and also making sure that you are planning to test similar accommodations in the same room. That is very important. So TIDE training. The TIDE training on-demand training module does include a section about student test settings. Test coordinators will be able to share this training, again, with the coordinators. As you can see, we have included additional details just to make you familiar with what you can expect to see during the on-demand training module features. And we want to make sure that we call out, and we often say this, but just as a reminder, making sure that you are putting in the test settings before test day. That is very important when it comes to preparation. SSD coordinator access to TIDE is another important feature. test coordinators can grant TIDE access for their school SSD coordinators. This information is also covered in further detail in the TIDE training. Something we are all familiar with prior to the implementation of with using digital is the non-standard administration report. So it is exactly the same feature. You will use this in conjunction with the TIDE system. So you will still access your non-standard administration report directly from SSD online. Here, what you are all very familiar with in most cases would be a sample of how the NAR is listed in order to break down the accommodations for each student, also including the student's SSD numbers under their name information. So you would want to make sure that you are referring to Section 2 to identify the individual students testing on the primary admin date, and then using Section 3 to identify students that will be testing during the accommodated window. On the NAR, you will also be able to identify your students who are receiving the EL time and 1/2 support. You also will be able to identify students who can test in the same room, and also identifying which test script to refer to for any additional instructions. So here we wanted to further break down digital testing with tools that are universal tools offered, accommodations, and supports. So again, looking at the universal tools, we have put in some descriptions that are automatically offered. You do not have to have these identified as an accommodation for the student. These features are automatically available in the digital platform. One or two examples here are a highlighter and also the use of a calculator. So that calculator is automatically embedded, and it would be for the math section, specifically for the use of the calculator section on the test. For digital accommodations, that would include test time and breaks, text-to-speech, assistive technology, color contrast, font size, and there are some others here to further provide as an example. Approval is required, and you will need to configure this in the TIDE configuration settings. Non-embedded accommodations, a few of them would be referred to, such as if a student has the use of Braille, raised line drawings, which is the most updated term for students receiving the Braille accommodation. If a student requires the use of a paper test book, so this would be for your students who have accommodations in SSD, but due to their disability, they are unable to test digitally. So the paper test book falls under non-embedded accommodations as well. Two additional examples, when you can also refer back to this, that because it will be provided in a PDF, would be the use of a scribe. Also, if the student has an accommodation where they're in a modified setting, which would be a one-to-one, that's also falls under non-embedded. Again, approval will be required. And just an additional note here, we just want to make sure we're calling this out. For accommodations being administered that are not listed in TIDE, you will select yes for non-embedded accommodations. Later on in today's session, we actually have some samples that will give a step-by-step walkthrough to help you along with this process. Another part of the digital test settings would be students who are receiving English learner support, which would be 50%. Students who are receiving translated test directions and word-to-word glossary, you do not need to set this feature, those two in TIDE. But the only one that you will need to do in TIDE directly with the configuration is 50% / time and 1/2, which is the same accommodation. So as you all know, in the SSD online system, it currently speaks in paper pencil language. For digital, we refer to what the accommodations are in the digital realm as digital alternatives. We wanted to just further simplify that here for you by letting you know that you can find the chart with the common names of accommodations and their digital alternatives that are located directly in the Digital SAT Test Coordinator Manual located on page 59. So this is just another helpful resource to make sure that what you know that the student has will align to the digital alternative. So again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, paper test book as an accommodation. Some students may test with accommodations such as paper or Braille test book that are not appropriate for a digital test. And again, if this is the case, the student may choose to opt out of testing in the digital mode and test with a paper, using the paper-based test. This is determined locally at the school level. So you, in terms, as far as the paper test itself. So you do not need to add the paper test request directly into SSD. Proctors will follow the instructions in the paper test administration manual, identified specifically for Connecticut SAT school day. What's important for you to know is that digital tests in the SAT suite of assessments are provided online through a secure browser. Schools will not receive paper test booklets. So that clearly is the difference from the paper book versus the digital. For recommended use, again, we cannot say this enough, and because we want to make sure that you are counting those students in advance that you are aware of that would require the paper assessment. The paper-based assessment is available for those students who are unable to take the computer-based assessment due to an identified disability. This accommodation is appropriate typically for a small number of students. It is not based on a preference of a student saying they wish to test paper. It is based on the student with the identified disability whose need is documented based on their IEP or 504 and have no other way to access the test. And in order to make that request, test coordinators will simply need to just contact College Board to request for the paper test booklets. There is a deadline date that we ask that you call in to make sure to submit your request, and that deadline date is March 16th. Next, we will discuss managing student test settings and student testing scenarios. So from your utilizing the digital accommodations, you will access the TIDE dashboard. So this is the screen that you will see from the TIDE dashboard. All students taking Connecticut SAT digital assessment must use the secure browser. Digital alternatives for College Board approved accommodations must be enabled in TIDE before test day. So we did touch on that briefly, but just another reminder, making sure that you are doing this prior to test day. The test settings and tools menu allows the test coordinators and SSD coordinators to view and edit accessibility features and the accommodations for students approved to test either with an accommodation or the EL support, which is EL 50%.
Keisha, I just wanted to jump in here on that slide because there could be some people attending who don't have access to TIDE. And I just want to talk about how you got access to TIDE. So if you were the test coordinator of record in your building with us on the 7th, you would have, or you should have received an email from Cambium giving you access to TIDE. And once you receive access as the test coordinator, you would have been able to then give access to your users, such as your SSD coordinator or any other staff that need access to be able to modify test settings. You can also give access to users who are going to act in the proctor role. If you are the test coordinator of record and you did not receive this email, I ask that you please reach out to me and I will put my email information in the chat, and you should reach out to me afterwards and we'll figure out what happened with your account. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. So for managing student test settings for digital accommodations, again, you are doing this in TIDE under test settings and tools. There are 4 sections under the student profile in order to configure the test settings and tools. Section 3 is state or College Board approved accommodations. Section 4 is test time and breaks. Section 5, reading or seeing text. And Section 6 for the 4-function calculator. This is for another example of what you will see from the test settings and tools. As you can see here, it is showing you the different categories. So if the student has, just using an example, under reading and seeing text, if the student has speech to text / assistive technology, it's breaking out the configurations for you here. Okay. So just in terms of the College Board approved accommodations, what you will see from the accommodations dropdown is, first, you're selecting your College Board accommodation. If accommodations have been approved by College Board, at this time, once you have already did the setup prior to test day, the assumption is that yes, you've already received a notification that your students have a College Board approval. If you have not submitted this request for any reason, please continue to do so. We have passed the late deadline. If you have transfers or students who are new to receiving an evaluation, but please communicate directly with Michelle and Deirdre, and they will follow up with me regarding any additional late submissions that are coming in. In terms of state allowed accommodations, just a quick call out. While it is identified as under the drop down, please be aware that there are no state allowed accommodations in use for CT SAT school day. If accommodations were not approved, do not submit them in TIDE. You certainly want to make sure, again, that if accommodations should be provided for students, that is done well in advance to test day. If you're having difficulties with submitting or any questions or concerns about the accommodations, again, send your contact information with your inquiry directly to Michelle and Deirdre, and they will follow up with me, and we will look further into it and provide any additional guidance to you. Using this feature, you will also want to make sure that you are using your NAR in order to identify all of your students who are approved to use accommodations. Sorry, I jumped. For your non-embedded accommodations, this applies for any accommodations that are not being administered through the digital testing platform and not listed in the test settings options. So in this case, you would select yes for non-embedded accommodations. So again, remember, I talked about we will provide you with some scenarios just to help with the walkthrough process so that you understand exactly what it is that you will be doing with your setup for your students. So our first scenario is for a student with time in 1/2 for reading. So step one is that you're going to go into the test settings, into the student's profile. Step two, you're simply going to choose College Board approved accommodations. This is the feature that we just showed you. Select the second option, which is the College Board accommodation. Step three, select no for if you have a non-embedded accommodation. Step four, you will choose time in 1/2 for all test sections. It's fairly simple. Step five, you will just need to print student test tickets and prepare for student to test in a non-standard room with time in 1/2. So if you have more than one student that's receiving the same amount of time, those students will test in the same room. Okay. Scenario two is if you have a student approved for pre-recorded audio MP3. So again, remember, in SSD Online, it's currently in a paper pencil language. When it translates into digital, your pre-recorded audio MP3 approved student will actually test using text to speech, or what is simply referred to as TTS. Again, you will need to select College Board approved accommodation. Here you will select no non-embedded accommodation. Step 4 now is where you're going to select the appropriate TTS option. So just to quickly clarify, TTS for using the digital platform can be provided for 2 different scenarios. So TTS read text only means that the student will test with 50%. In order to ensure that the student will receive 50%, you will start with selecting step 4, TTS read text only, and then step 5, choosing the appropriate time setting. So that would be either the 50%, or if you choose double time, then that would be the option that you see directly under TTS read text. That would be TTS read text and graphics. Once you have selected your TTS option along with the test timing, then you will go on to print the student's test ticket and prepare to test student in a non-standard room with time in 1/2, because that is the specific scenario we're using here. In scenario 3, this would be for your students who are testing with food, drink, medication. So again, you're simply going into the test setting for the student's profile, selecting step 2 by clicking on College Board accommodation, and here you're selecting yes for a non-embedded accommodation. And then finally, step 4, to print test ticket and prepare to test your student in the standard time room. Remember, this student in this example, they're not receiving any extended time. This is simply recognizing that the student has been approved for the use of the food, drink, and medication during testing as a College Board accommodation. Okay. Scenario 4 is for our students who are EL and testing with the use of 50% time as a support. So again, what looks familiar to you is that you're going right back into the test settings to go to the student's profile, selecting step 2, which is the College Board approved accommodation. I know I've said support a lot for EL, but it is identified on the NAR as an accommodation. So for the purpose of the digital platform, you will select College Board accommodation, College Board approved accommodation. Step 3 will require that you select yes for EL support. So that's different from what we've seen in the other scenarios. Here, you're just simply selecting yes that the student has the EL support. And in the test time and break dropdown, now you're going to select time in 1/2, which is what the student as identified as the EL support will use. For scenario 5, again, we spoke about this briefly earlier. When you have EL students, there are 2 other options, translated test directions and word-to-word dictionary. For those 2 examples, scenarios for these students, no test settings will be needed in order to do the configuration. You will simply just provide the translated test directions and or word-to-word dictionary, or both, depending on the student's needs. Or do we have any questions that are coming in the chat right now?
Keisha, this is Deirdre, and I wanted to highlight a question that came up earlier regarding the selection of extended time. So if you have a student that is approved for 50% time and a half, but also is approved for breaks as needed, how is that captured in TIDE, and how do our test examiners make sure that the student is identified in the correct test settings so that the accommodations are provided appropriately?
Okay, I will just call on my colleague Aixa to respond to that question. Aixa?
So yeah, sorry, I was
Okay,
sorry,
no worries. Thank you.
I've unmuted myself. Could you, I think I know which one this was about. Could you repeat the question for me? How it is entered in TIDE for a student that has that
Right,
extended
so
time and
for
breaks?
kiddos with 50% extended time, but also breaks as needed.
Well, we do only have one of the only options is the extra and extended breaks standard time. I will need to double check the accommodated manual briefly, and let me get back to you on how to enter that into TIDE. One moment. So let me get back to you either by the end of the call, or I will have the answer for Michelle. So bear
Okay.
with me.
All right, well, we can move on to another question in the meantime. Thank you, Aixa.
Keisha, we got a question. If maybe you could talk a little bit again about when a paper test option is appropriate for a student. Kind of just go back to that content a little bit and review that, because I think some people need that.
Sure. So with the paper pencil request is, just let me move this. Okay. So again, when we're referring to paper test books, so there are two different examples that we're giving here, right? One, if a student requires paper pencil testing instead of the testing in digital mode, or when a student has Braille. So a student who utilizes Braille, in most cases, will ask to receive a Braille test book. That will fall under paper pencil accommodations. But what's different in the first scenario is that for school day, if you have a student who has accommodations in College Board, they're approved. So let's say, give the example, the student has 100% time and they utilize large print, but they do not want to use the universal tool of the Zoom features, and it's due to their disability, and they would require to test with paper pencil. In this example, you are simply requesting for paper pencil testing for this student. We will make sure that the accommodations that the student has will be matched in order to make sure the student in that particular example would have large print materials. So that student would not be able to take the test digitally. And that's based on them having the accommodation. What we do not offer for paper pencil is if it's just a decision that my student says he or she does not want to test digitally and would prefer to use paper pencil. This is not the student who is identified with a disability that may hinder them from being able to test under the digital platform. Totally different. So we want to make sure that we're clear in terms of saying the preferential is not the option. The need is based on the student having a disability, and testing digitally is not considered appropriate for them. The student is already in SSD. They've already been processed. The student, based on what the school submitted for CT SAT school day, has an IEP or 504. Again, we've already approved the student, but the information communicated as we're interpreting is that the student cannot sit for the test digitally and would need paper pencil. And in order to make sure that the student has paper pencil testing set up in time for test day, you must contact College Board to directly request for a paper pencil version of the exam.
Keisha, can you speak to the process for students that require a scribe? So can do these students have to test with paper pencil booklets, or can they test in a one-on-one setting and have the proctor serve as a bubbler?
So yes, they should test in a one-to-one setting if the student has a scribe. Well, the first thing is that we know CT/SAT School Day does not have an essay, right? So the scribe is not doing any writing in terms of written content. So if the student has a scribe and would require paper pencil testing, then that scribe would do the bubbling. The scribe would transcribe the answers onto the Scantron for the student. So it's going to be based on the individual need, because we have seen where a student may have the use of a scribe, but if they're testing digitally, they're able to, respond to multiple choice from the keyboard, but it depends on the individual need. If that student requires to have the human scribe, then yes, that would be paper pencil testing, and that must also be ordered in advance.
Keisha, let me jump back in, and I may need also your assistance with the one question that came up, only because it may also involve SSD policy. So usually, if a student has accommodations, multiple accommodations need to be kind of combined, there may be a need to combine different scripts, right, within the accommodated manual. So for this student who has 50% extended time, but also has extended breaks or extra breaks, or breaks as needed. Okay, so in my recommendation would be to add the extra time and breaks in Tide, because this will allow the proctor to pause the test for the student. And I will refer to you, Keisha, in terms of the scripts for the accommodated, for this type of accommodation. So because if a student has extra time, the time will be kept by by TDS. So the test itself, the program itself will keep the student's time and will give the allotted time to the student, and that's 50% time. It will not allow the proctor to pause. It should not allow the proctor to pause the student without causing an interruption in the test itself. So for that, in terms of the script, I will hand it back to you, Keisha, because my recommendation would be to pick extended time, extended breaks in the options in the drop down in Tide.
I think because this is like one of the honestly like a onesie twosie type of situation, I would prefer to take this one offline. So the question, so the person who sent the question, if you could be so kind, if you wouldn't mind just sharing your email, and we could reach out to you directly to further discuss the specific needs, just to make sure that nothing is being misinterpreted, and we want to make sure everything is set up appropriately for test day.
And we have their email if they submitted a question, so we're good. I'll get that to you.
Okay. Did we have other questions?
There are more. I didn't know if somebody was like reading them to you or.
Actually, Keisha, if you could address the provision of the MP3 accommodations. MP3 is an accommodation used for our paper pencil testers. But in the digital platform, we offer text to speech. And Keisha, if you could just address the 100% extended time versus the 50% extended time.
Sure. So yes, typically for the paper pencil version of the test, MP3 or pre-recorded audio, that automatically includes 100%. For the digital platform, it is broken up into two different versions. So TTS, text to speech, read text only, automatically includes 50%. You would still need to do the configuration as we showed separately. So you would select the TTS read text only. It may be, and it depends, we're not, and this is, I guess to say the benefit in terms of one of the benefits with digital is that the TTS options will allow the schools to make the determination along with the student in advance to say which category, in terms of testing the student would want to use. Read text only, it's simply what it is. It's only reading the text. And so that may be more beneficial to the student who does not need specific details that's associated with read text and graphics. Your read text and graphics category, we find, is typically more beneficial to a student who has a visual impairment. However, it does not mean that a student who has difficulties with reading would not benefit from that. So we allow the schools, what we say, to determine it locally, to say which one that the student will use. One thing you will need to keep in mind is that 50%, of course, as we all know, is testing over 2 days. Excuse me, testing over 1 day. I'm jumping ahead. However, if the student were to use 100%, that means that he or she will test over 2 days. So again, your read text and graphics will be 100% because it's going through breaking down each of any graphics, let's say from math, anything that is, has to be provided in further detail to a visual learner, that will need to include additional time. But if it's just read text only, for the digital exam, the student can still receive read text only, but utilize 50%. And again, it's determined at the local level. It will be based on the individual student needs. But one of the things, just in terms of sharing this information with the audience, is that we've often heard feedback that, to ask, well, can I test the student with less than a 100%? In the paper pencil version for pre-recorded audio, there's no flexibility there. So here from the digital platform, that flexibility is there, but again, it's based on the student need. So I wouldn't say that it would apply for all students that you're testing with this accommodation to use read text, or for all students to use text and graphics. But having the conversations early on, today is 2/14, you're testing March 23rd. There's enough time to have those conversations with the students to say, this is what it's going to look like on test day, right? You have the digital test preview. So you have some options there in order to figure out what will work. But again, the one thing we will point out is the difference is 1 day versus 2 days. Next question.
Keisha, can you talk a little bit? We're getting we seem to have gotten a number of questions about students who are testing with text to speech, and can they be in the same room with kids with the same, if they have headphones, can they be in the same room with kids who have the same timing? So let's say it's text to speech for text only, and they have 50% or time and a half. Can they be in the same room with kids who have time and a half without the text to speech, or must they be in separate rooms? We're getting a couple variations on this question. Can kids with the same timing, even if they don't have text to speech, test in the same room with kids that have text to speech if the kids have headphones?
So ideally, I would say you should not. And, just in terms of, because they are technically different accommodations. So the one thing that we have to remember is that, so your students who have TTS, that's considered an accommodation that's allowed in the accommodated window. So you have the flexibility to test your students. You don't have to test them on the primary day. You have that 10-day/2-week window in order to test students. If your students who are, and Adrian, stop me if I skipped over anything, but if you have students who are just receiving time in 1/2, those are your students who fall under the primary test day. So those students would be testing on March 23rd only, or if they are unable to test on the March 23rd test, those students would then have the option, if they are just time in 1/2 only, those students would also have the option, well, not option, to test on the makeup date. So if they are unable to test on the primary date, then you're now going to, as a test coordinator, you will do the configuration to set them up for the makeup date. Your TTS students, those are accommodations that, again, fall under the accommodated window. So I do not recommend that you test those students in the same room.
Thanks. I think that's helpful.
Okay.
There's a question here, and I am not sure of this. Perhaps Keisha, you know. The question is there a way to annotate reading passages on the digital test? So essentially, kind of, is there a way to take note? I think like a note-taking feature on the digital test. I don't think that there is, but I'm going to toss that out to Aixa and Keisha. Maybe you know?
I was relying on Aixa's expertise as our digital person.
In digital testing, though, you do, this is a difference from paper pencil testing. In digital testing, you do provide students with scratch paper. So you do have, so students will have scratch paper, and if they want to kind of take notes or make notations on scratch paper, they will have that.
But it's not available for on the screen. Like maybe that was a part of the question. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing it.
There is an option for notes or notepad within the, so they can click on that and they can type their add their notes in there. So there is an option for those that prefer the online version rather than the scratch paper, which they do receive scratch papers at the beginning of each section as well.
And I'll include a link to our accessibility chart. So we do have an accessibility chart that's specific to the Connecticut SAT school day. And while we don't have, so if you just bear with me for 1 second, I'm just going to read off some of the options that are available to all students as a universal embedded tool. So the College Board offers the use of a highlighter, the ability for students to use a line focus so that they can mask specific content on the test screen. Students can mark their items for review. There is a digital note-taking feature that's similar to what we offer for Smarter Balanced as well as Next Generation Science. So there's an embedded digital notepad. And students can use the strike through feature as well as zoom in and zoom out. So I'll include a link to the accessibility chart, and you're certainly encouraged to take a look at it and make sure that when you're setting up a practice session with your students, that they have an opportunity to try out some of these digital tools.
Thank you, Deirdre. Aixa.
We got another question here, Keisha, that I think you can talk about a little bit. So this particular question is, what script would be used if a student has time and a half and extra breaks? And so can you talk a little bit about kind of when you have to combine scripts when a student has kind of multiple accommodations?
Yes. So from your NAR will direct you to which particular script that you will need to use. So you have to, again, it's important that you print out your NAR to make sure that you are referencing the appropriate script for scenarios where the student has more than one type of accommodation that's being provided. So if they have 50% and additional breaks, or a different type of break, because we do have varying types of breaks. So the student may have extra breaks in addition to regular breaks that are already built into the test, or the student may have similar, I think this came up earlier, like where the student has breaks as needed in addition to extended time. So in those scenarios, the NAR will reference the script that you will need to use in order to follow through to provide the additional breaks along with the timing of the test for the student.
There's a question, Keisha, asking where do you enter breaks as needed?
So that would be under the non-embedded accommodations. So you're not going to, when we went through the screens before, in those scenarios, we were showing you that there are certain accommodations that will automatically be included, and then there are other accommodations that you would have to select as non-embedded.
Okay, and this question, I'm not sure if it's best for you, Keisha, or for you, Aixa, but there is a question about the Zoom in. What font size for Zoom in? What font size is the maximum for what's under Universal Tools in the student testing application?
Ooh, that's a great question. I was gonna say, you can click zoom in 4 times, but that doesn't give you an exact one. So let me grab that really quick. I do know in the actual settings in Tide, it would go up to level 8, and it would be 340. So let me cross-check what's added in the universal one. So bear with me a moment.
I was hoping to copy and paste that information from our assessment guidelines, but we do, as mentioned, we have up through level 8. Level 0 is 12 font, so no zoom is applied, and then level 1 is 24 point fonts. But anything beyond level 5 automatically enables a streamline, and so level 5 and up, or level 5 is 85 point font. So if there's a way that I can get this information pasted into the chat, then I'll include that for your information.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, Keisha, did you touch on the fact that schools should not be selecting state allowed accommodations?
Yes, we did touch on that very briefly, but we can just discuss that again. So for the purpose of CT/SAT school day, state allowed accommodations are not offered. So although you will see that in the drop down, please disregard that and only select the option for College Board approved accommodation, because state allowed does not apply to Connecticut.
We got a question here asking when can they begin entering accommodation settings into Tide, and the answer is you can do so now. You want to make sure you're not entering anything until you know that an accommodation is approved. But test coordinators have access to Tide and can provide access to Tide for their SSD coordinators, and you can begin entering those accommodations now if you'd like.
We still have a few minutes remaining, so if there are any other questions coming in.
Here's a question about one-to-one testing and digital testing. So the student has been approved for one-to-one testing, but they can test in the digital mode. So the question is, would that be considered a non-embedded accommodation?
The one-to-one, that is correct, non-embedded, correct.
So Aixa, maybe you could talk about this because we're getting some questions about what they have to send back to College Board in terms of attendance records after testing. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So you do have to send back a master list along, of course, with your NAR as part of the materials that you do send back to College Board. And what you can use is you can use various methods. You can either use something that you create in-house, or you can take advantage of the rosters, of having the ability to create rosters in Tide. And then you can do that. And that certainly is helpful for setting up rosters for students with accommodations. So you can utilize that as your roster. You can, and you can also utilize that as your, for your proctors to check in students as they come in and as your attendance list. And that can certainly be sent back as well to College Board. And one thing I highlighted in the last one, in our last webinar, if you do create a roster in Tide, that does not lock in the students to that. It doesn't depend, testing does not depend based on the roster, right? Like it doesn't lock in the students to that certain room for them to be able to test. It just, it's just an aid to assist with organization, to assist with all of that. It does not speak to the test administration. I just wanted to highlight that part.
Okay, and there's another question here. Can students with breaks as needed test in the same room? If there's more than one student that has breaks as needed, do they have to test one-to-one, or can they test in the same room?
So that's always a very popular question. And yes, you can, but it has to be done in a way where the students are separated far apart from each other enough so that, because these students will take breaks as needed at different times, because they are considered, they're not scheduled breaks. So you want to, not designated in terms of, in the proctor's manual to administer. So you want to make sure that when any of the students need to take a break, that they do not cause disruption for any of the other students in that room who also have breaks as needed, but are not breaking at the same time. So you have to make sure that they're spaced out far enough, again, so that it does not cause disruption, because their timing will be different. And one student may need to take an additional 5-minute break. Another student may need to take a 10-minute break. So you don't want them sitting within close proximity so that it causes a disturbance.
Just really briefly, because I can't find the question on the chat, but the one going back to the materials to send back to College Board, on the testing, the coordinator manual, if you go to page 42, that highlights exactly what you can keep, what you can get rid of, and what's sent to back to College Board. So it's on page 42.
Thank you, Aixa. Michelle, we are at 2:01.
Yes, it was like so slow getting my computer back. I mean, my camera back on. Yes, we are. Thank you, everyone. We're at time. And if there were questions that we didn't get to, we will certainly follow up with you. We're also, we'll share the list of questions and answers with everyone that was on the call, and we'll post them. Same thing with the questions that came in on Friday. We just haven't had a chance to go back through those. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, Keisha. Thanks, Adrian, Aisa, Karen behind the scenes, Deirdre, Abe. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the
Thank you,
day.
everyone. Take care.
Thank you.